Lena Martin had always been a city girl. The noise of honking cars, the crowded streets, and the constant rush of life were all she knew. Raised in a small apartment in the middle of the city, she never thought much about rural life. Her father, Robert Martin, had been a quiet man, often distant and reserved. He wasn't one to talk about family or the past, and Lena never questioned it. When she was young, her father would occasionally mention the old ranch in the countryside, but his words always sounded more like a distant memory than something real. It had been 5 years since Lena last saw her father, and even longer since they had spoken. His sudden death in a car accident left her with little to go on. There were no other relatives, and his estate, what little there was of it, was passed down to her. A lawyer's letter, cold and official, informed her that she had inherited the ranch. It was a piece of land, a place she had never really known, but it was hers now, and with that inheritance came the responsibility to take care of it, or so she thought. Lena wasn't interested in the land, not in the way her father might have been. She had plans. She had a job in the city, a busy career that promised a future she was excited about. But now this inheritance had thrown everything off course. It seemed like an inconvenience at first, just another thing she had to deal with. After a few weeks of trying to figure out what to do with the property, Lena made up her mind. She would sell the ranch. It seemed like the easiest option, especially since she had no connection to the place. Her father had been a mystery to her, and she didn't want to spend any more time in a place that only reminded her of his absence. The road trip to the ranch was a long one. Lena drove for hours, the landscape changing as she left the city behind. The tall buildings and endless concrete were replaced by wide open spaces, fields of grass, and the occasional farmhouse. She had seen pictures of the ranch before, but seeing it in person felt different. As she drove deeper into the countryside, Lena couldn't help but notice the eerie quiet. There were no bustling crowds, no sounds of traffic, just the occasional chirp of birds or the distant hum of wind moving through the trees. The road grew narrower, and soon she was driving along a dirt path, her car bouncing over the uneven ground. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. It was beautiful in its own way, the vastness of the land stretching out before her. But there was something unsettling about it, too. Lena didn't understand it, but she felt a chill creep up her spine as she drove closer to the ranch. The ranch itself came into view slowly, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. The house was a large old building, with wooden panels that had faded from years of exposure to the sun. It looked worn down, as though time had forgotten it. The barn nearby was in better shape, though still showing signs of age. The entire place seemed stuck in time, as if it had been frozen in the past. Lena pulled up in front of the house and sat in her car for a moment, looking at the property. She had expected something more, lived in. This place felt empty, abandoned, as though no one had cared for it in years. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car. The air smelled different here, fresh, earthy, and slightly musty. It was a stark contrast to the city air she was used to. Lena hesitated before walking up to the front door, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. Dust covered the furniture and cobwebs hung in the corners of the room. The house felt like it had been untouched for decades. As Lena walked through the house, she felt a strange sense of unease. There were old photographs on the walls, pictures of her father from when he was young. She recognized the face, but not the life. The life that had been lived here, the memories, felt like they belonged to someone else. She moved through the rooms, her footsteps barely making a sound on the wooden floors. The living room had a large stone fireplace, but the hearth was cold. The kitchen was old-fashioned, with rusted appliances and faded counters. Everything seemed out of place, like it was stuck in a time long past. Her father had never talked about this place, and now that she was here, she realized just how little she knew about him. The silence of the house seemed to press down on her, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets. Lena finally made her way to the stairs, deciding to explore the upstairs rooms. She climbed slowly, each step creaking under her weight. At the top, she found more of the same, rooms filled with dust, old furniture, and forgotten items. But then, she came across a door at the end of the hall that was different from the others. It was slightly ajar, and a strange sense of curiosity urged her forward. When she pushed the door open, she found herself in a small room, perhaps once a study or office. The room was filled with old books, and in the corner was a desk covered in papers. Lena moved toward the desk, her fingers brushing over the surface. There she found a small leather-bound notebook. It was old, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. It was her father's handwriting, but the words were jumbled, almost frantic. The entries spoke of debts, strange dealings, and a growing sense of fear. The further Lena read, the more she felt a chill run down her spine. Her father had been involved in something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The final page was the most unsettling. It was a cryptic message written in hurried, messy handwriting. "There's no way out, Lena. The land will take what's owed. The debts are beyond us now." Lena closed the notebook quickly, her heart racing. She didn't know what to make of it. Had her father been involved in something dangerous? What had he gotten himself into? And why had he never told her? As she sat there, trying to process everything she had just read, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Startled, Lena stood up quickly, her pulse quickening. She had been alone in the house, or so she thought. Who could it be? She walked cautiously to the door, her mind racing with possibilities. When she opened it, a man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and piercing eyes. "Are you Lena?" he asked, his voice deep and calm. "Yes," she replied hesitantly. "Who are you?" "I'm Jonah," he said, his eyes scanning the house behind her. "I worked for your father. I've been waiting for you." Lena didn't know what to expect, but something about Jonah made her uneasy. There was a look in his eyes that suggested he knew more about her father's past than he was letting on. "I came to offer my help," he continued, his tone serious. "This place, it's not what you think." Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. There was something about this ranch, something she couldn't put her finger on. But she was starting to realize that her inheritance was much more than just a piece of land, and soon she would learn just how true that was. Lena stood frozen for a moment, staring at the man in the doorway. Jonah. His name echoed in her mind, but nothing about him seemed familiar. His rough appearance, the deep lines carved into his weathered face, made it clear that he had spent many years working the land. But there was something in his eyes that made Lena uneasy, something unreadable, as if he carried a burden heavier than anyone should. "Are you sure you're Lena Martin?" he asked again, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken weight. Lena nodded, feeling her heart race. "Yes, I am." "I don't understand. How do you know my name?" Jonah stepped inside the house without waiting for an invitation, his boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. The air in the room seemed to grow thicker, as if the walls themselves were watching her. He glanced around, taking in the dust-covered furniture and the eerie silence of the house. It was obvious that the place hadn't been lived in for a long time. "Your father spoke about you," Jonah said slowly, his voice low, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "Though not often," he kept to himself. "But he always said if anything happened to him, you'd be the one to take over." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. Her father had never been open with her about the ranch, let alone the people who worked there. She had assumed he didn't care much for the place, but Jonah's words painted a different picture. This ranch, this land, it seemed to mean more to him than she could ever understand. "I didn't know him well," Lena admitted, her voice quiet. "I didn't even know about the ranch until after his death." Jonah turned to her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "That's the thing about your father. He kept everything quiet. Too quiet, if you ask me." He paused, as if trying to decide whether or not to say more. "But there's something you need to understand, Lena. This place isn't just a piece of land. It's tied to something older, something dangerous." Lena's stomach tightened at his words. She wasn't sure if she believed him, but there was a gravity to his tone that made her listen. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feeling a chill creep up her spine. Jonah walked further into the living room, his boots making soft thuds as he moved. He gestured toward the windows, which overlooked the vast empty fields outside. "Your father wasn't just a rancher. He was a man who made deals. And some of those deals, well, they weren't with people." Lena frowned, trying to make sense of what Jonah was saying. "What kind of deals?" Jonah's eyes flickered briefly to the fireplace, where the embers of a long-extinguished fire still smoldered. "The kind of deals that take a price. And not just money. Your father made a bargain with forces far older than us, forces that aren't kind. This ranch, this land, it's part of that deal." Lena was silent, trying to process his words. She wanted to laugh at him, to tell him he was being ridiculous, but something about his sincerity made her pause. "You're saying my father made a deal with something supernatural?" Jonah nodded slowly. "Not just something, someone. You see, this ranch, this land, it was never just about farming or cattle. It was built on an old debt, a debt that your father could never repay." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "The land was cursed long before your father ever set foot here." Lena's mind raced. She had heard stories growing up, ghost stories and legends about places like this. Old people in the city used to whisper about haunted land, about places where people disappeared. But she had always dismissed them as just that, stories. Now, standing in the middle of this decaying house, hearing Jonah's warning, it all suddenly felt real. "What are you saying?" Lena asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to my father?" Jonah exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Your father was a good man in his own way, but he was also desperate. Desperate to make the ranch profitable, desperate to keep the land. And in that desperation, he made a deal with the wrong people." He shook his head as if recalling painful memories. "It wasn't just about the money, Lena, it was about power. And power, as your father learned too late, comes with a price." Lena felt a lump form in her throat. What kind of power? And who did he make this deal with? Jonah stared at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "It's hard to explain," he said. "But your father didn't just owe money. He owed something far worse. He made a bargain with the land itself, with a force that has been around for centuries, long before any of us were born." He paused, looking at her as though trying to decide how much to say, and now that same force is waiting for someone to pay the price your father couldn't. Lena took a step back, her mind reeling. She had come here hoping to sell the ranch, to put everything behind her. But now everything felt different. The air was heavier, the silence more oppressive. It was as though the walls of the house were closing in on her, as though someone was watching her every move. "What does that mean for me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do I have to do?" Jonah's face grew even more serious. "You need to be careful, Lena. The land has a way of getting what it's owed. And it's not just about money. It wants something more from you, something you might not be able to give." Lena didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She had come here expecting to wrap up her father's estate and leave. Instead, she felt like she was being pulled into something much larger, something that she couldn't understand. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask for this. I just want to sell the ranch and move on with my life." Jonah looked at her, his expression filled with regret. "I know, Lena. But sometimes you don't get to choose what happens next. The land will take what's owed, and you have to decide whether you'll make a deal with it, or whether you'll fight." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She had never believed in superstitions or myths, but Jonah's words had a weight that couldn't be ignored. The air around her felt charged, like a storm was building, and she was standing right in the middle of it. "What happens if I don't fight?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonah didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his expression grave. Finally he spoke. "You'll lose more than you could ever imagine. This land doesn't forget and it doesn't let go. Your father made a choice and now it's your turn." Lena was silent for a long moment, her thoughts racing. She didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. "Stay close," Jonah said, as if reading her mind. "I'll help you if you let me. But you need to understand, Lena, there's more to this place than you realize." With those words, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Lena standing there, alone in the fading light of the room. She watched him leave, her mind still spinning. Jonah's warning echoed in her head, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt a deep, unsettling sense of dread. She had come here to close a chapter in her life, but instead, she had just opened a door to something far darker than she could have ever imagined. And now there was no turning back. Lena sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, still trying to process Jonah's words. The room felt colder now, the shadows longer. Her mind raced with questions. How could her father have made a deal with something as sinister as Jonah described? And if that was true, what did it mean for her? Could she really just sell the ranch and walk away? Or was something far worse waiting for her if she tried to leave? The house around her felt different, as if it were no longer just a home, but something alive. a living, breathing entity that watched her every move. The strange chill in the air seemed to settle deeper into her bones, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. After Jonah left, Lena spent the rest of the evening wandering through the house, unable to shake the unease that had taken over her. The silence was oppressive. The house, though old and decaying, felt far too alive for comfort. It was as if it had its own heartbeat, its own breath. The floors creaked under her feet and every corner seemed to hold a secret. She made her way back upstairs, drawn to the small room she had discovered earlier, the one with the leather-bound notebook. She needed answers. If her father had been involved in something dangerous, something beyond her understanding, she had to know the truth. As she sat down at the desk, the notebook still resting in front of her, she noticed something strange. The pages of the notebook seemed to flicker, as though they were moving slightly in the breeze. Though the windows were shut tight, Lena's heart skipped a beat. She quickly opened the notebook again, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. The last entry was the most chilling of all. Her father's handwriting was frantic, the words almost illegible. It spoke of a promise made to the land, a promise that would claim everything, his soul, his family, his very life. The words were almost a plea. The land demands what it is owed. It cannot be escaped. Lena must return. Lena's mind went numb. She felt as though the room was closing in on her. Her father's words were more than a warning. They were a direct message. But what did it mean? Why had he written this, and why had he left it for her to find? She closed the notebook with a snap, her thoughts racing. Her father had known something terrible, and yet he had never told her. Had he been trying to protect her? Or had he been too afraid to explain the truth? Lena pushed the notebook aside, trying to shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. She needed air. She needed to clear her head. She stepped outside, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin. The moon was high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the fields. For a moment, the ranch seemed peaceful, bathed in silver light. But the calm was deceptive. There was something about the land, something lurking just beneath the surface. Lena's footsteps crunched on the dry earth as she walked toward the barn. The wind whispered in the tall grass, and the distant sound of crickets filled the air. It should have been soothing, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She quickened her pace, the barn looming ahead like a dark silhouette against the night sky. When she reached the barn, she paused at the entrance. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. Inside, the barn smelled of hay and wood, but there was an undercurrent to the scent, something metallic like blood. Lena stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The barn was empty, save for a few scattered tools and old equipment. But as she walked deeper into the space, something caught her eye. A large old chest sat against the far wall, its wooden surface worn and weathered with age. It was an unusual sight in the otherwise empty barn. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she moved toward the chest, her heart pounding in her chest. What could be inside? Could it be something her father had left behind? Something that explained all of this? She knelt down and carefully unlatched the chest, her hand shaking. When she opened it, she was met with darkness. At first she thought the chest was empty, but then her eyes adjusted and she saw it. A large black stone lying at the bottom of the chest. The stone was smooth, its surface cold to the touch. It seemed to absorb the light around it, as though it were not of this world. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she picked up the stone. It felt wrong in her hands, heavy with an unnatural weight. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, a sudden chill ran through her body. She dropped the stone back into the chest as though it had burned her. She stood up quickly, feeling a wave of dizziness wash over her. The barn seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in. She stumbled back toward the door, her breath coming in short gasps. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating. She needed to get out. She needed to leave this place before it consumed her. As she stepped outside the barn, the world around her seemed to shift. The once peaceful night had become oppressive, the air heavier than it had been before. Lena's pulse raced as she turned toward the house, her legs carrying her faster than she realized. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The moment she reached the front door, she slammed it shut behind her, her chest heaving with each breath. She leaned against the door, her mind racing. What was happening? The stone, the strange feeling in the air, the things Jonah had said, it all felt like something out of a nightmare. But it was real. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever had been set in motion when her father made that deal was now reaching out to her, pulling her deeper into its grip. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was alive in a way she couldn't understand, and it wanted something from her. Lena sank down onto the couch, her mind whirling. She had to leave. She had to get away from here. But as she stared out the window, the moonlight casting long shadows over the fields, she knew there was nowhere to run. The land had claimed her father, and now it was coming for her. Her fingers curled into fists, and for the first time she felt the weight of the promise her father had made, the promise that had cursed them both. Whatever it was that had been set in motion, Lena knew now that it wouldn't stop until it got what it wanted, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to fight it. But she had no choice. It was too late to walk away. The darkness was already here. Lena's nights had become restless, plagued by nightmares that left her waking in a cold sweat, her heart racing in her chest. The house, once quiet and abandoned, now felt suffocating. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind that rattled the window seemed to whisper secrets she wasn't ready to hear. And all the while, the ranch itself, the land her father had inherited and then given away, seemed to pulse beneath her feet, alive in a way that made her skin crawl. Jonah had warned her. He had told her that the land wanted something, but Lena had no idea just how true that was until now. The more she stayed in the house, the more she felt its pull, like an invisible hand slowly drawing her into the depths of a trap that had been set long before she ever arrived. It was early one morning when Lena woke to the sound of footsteps outside her bedroom window. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but the footsteps were too deliberate, too slow to be anything else. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. The shadows in the room seemed darker than usual, the silence heavier. When she finally gathered the courage to go outside, she found Jonah standing by the old fence near the edge of the property, staring out at the fields with a troubled look on his face. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the horizon, but it didn't feel warm. The air was thick, as though a storm was brewing just out of sight. "Jonah," Lena called softly as she approached, trying not to startle him. "What's going on? I keep hearing things, and I can't shake this feeling that something's wrong." Jonah turned slowly, his face drawn and tired. "It's getting worse, Lena," he said quietly, his voice low and heavy with worry. "The land. It's restless. Your father knew this would happen. He made a deal, and now that you're here, the land is calling for payment." Lena swallowed hard, the words sinking into her chest like stones. "I don't understand." "What do you mean, payment? My father made some kind of deal, but what does that have to do with me?" Jonah glanced over his shoulder at the barn, the shadows creeping along its walls like something alive. "The land is bound by a debt," he said slowly. "Your father thought he could escape it, thought he could outrun it, but that's not how it works. You can't outrun the land, and now that you're here, the debt has passed to you." Lena shook her head, trying to grasp what Jonah was saying. "But I didn't ask for any of this. I came here to sell the ranch and move on with my life. I don't want to be a part of whatever my father got involved in." Jonah's face softened with a mix of sympathy and something else, something darker. "I'm sorry, Lena, but that's not how it works. When your father died, the deal wasn't broken. The land doesn't just belong to you now. It's waiting for you to pay the price." Lena felt her stomach tighten. "What price?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What does it want from me?" Jonah looked at her for a long moment, his eyes sad and weary. "It's not something you can just give away. The land doesn't want something you can touch. It wants something deeper. Your father, he made a bargain with something ancient, something that doesn't care about money or land. It cares about your soul, Lena, and it's been waiting for you to arrive." A chill ran down her spine. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "You're saying that the land wants my soul?" she whispered, as if the words alone could make it real. Jonah nodded, his expression grim. "I know it sounds impossible, but that's what your father gave. He thought he could pay off the debt with anything, money, cattle, land, but that wasn't enough. The land takes what it wants, and now it's come for you." Lena's mind raced. She had heard of stories, of old myths and legends about lands that were cursed, about deals made in the dark corners of the earth, but she had never believed them. Not until now. She had come to the ranch to escape her father's shadow, to rid herself of a past that had always seemed too strange to understand. And now she was trapped in a nightmare that had no easy way out. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to—" Jonah interrupted her, his voice sharp and urgent. "Listen to me, Lena, you don't have much time. The land won't wait forever. It's not just going to come for you in some slow, peaceful way. It will take you by force if it has to. You can try to resist, but the more you resist, the more it will consume you." Lena felt tears welling in her eyes. She had no choice but to listen, to understand. The weight of her father's past was pressing down on her like a stone, and she could feel the ground beneath her feet beginning to tremble, as if the land itself was shifting in its hunger. Jonah stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You can fight it, Lena, but you have to make a choice. The land doesn't give second chances. You'll need to make a bargain, just like your father did, but this time you can make the terms. You don't have to give it everything. You can find a way to break the cycle." Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She looked at Jonah, searching his face for any sign of hope, but there was none. Jonah wasn't offering a solution, just a way to survive, and Lena didn't know if survival was enough. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice cracking. "How can I make a deal with something like that? How can I trust anything about this place?" Jonah placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You don't have to trust it, Lena. You just have to survive. The land doesn't care about trust. It only cares about what it's owed. And right now it's waiting for you to make a choice." Lena stood there for a long moment, her thoughts swirling in a mix of fear and confusion. She had never believed in anything beyond what she could see and touch. But now the impossible was staring her in the face, and she had no choice but to face it. The land was calling for payment. And whether she was ready or not, Lena knew that she had to make a decision. The darkness was already at her door, and there was no turning back. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "I'll make the deal." Jonah's eyes softened with something like relief. "Be careful, Lena, the land doesn't forget. And once the deal is made, there's no going back." With those final words, Jonah turned and walked back toward the fields, leaving Lena standing alone, facing the ranch, the land, and the choice that would define her future. The weight of her decision hung heavy in the air, and Lena knew that she was no longer just a visitor in this place. She was part of its story, part of the ancient bargain that had been struck long before her arrival, and now it was time for her to pay the price. The night was heavy with silence, and Lena's heart thudded in her chest as she stood on the edge of the ranch, staring out at the fields. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of earth and something far more unsettling. Jonah's words echoed in her mind. Once the deal is made, there's no going back. She didn't know what she had expected, maybe some kind of supernatural intervention, a twist in fate, but nothing felt different now. It was just her, standing alone in the dark with the weight of a decision she never thought she'd have to make. The land felt alive, as if it was holding its breath, waiting. Lena felt the air change around her, the pressure in her chest rising. She had come here to escape her father's past, but now she was bound to it, tangled in the same mystery that had consumed him. She didn't want to make a deal. She didn't want to be a part of this strange legacy, but what choice did she have? The land was coming for her. It had waited long enough. Jonah had told her the truth. The land didn't care about trust or feelings. It only cared about what it was owed. Her father had made a promise that had tied them both to the land forever. And now, Lena had to decide how much of herself she was willing to give up to break free. Lena walked slowly back to the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. The walls of the house seemed to lean in on her as she crossed the threshold. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit there and wait for the land to claim her, to claim everything she had. She went to her father's study, the room where she had found the notebook. It felt colder in there now, the air thick with the weight of old secrets. The desk sat in the same place, the leather chair still pushed back as if someone had just left it. The notebook was gone. The room was bare, but Lena could still feel the presence of her father, as if he were watching her. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift in the dim light. Lena's breath caught in her throat. What had she hoped for? That somehow everything would be undone? That if she ignored it long enough, the land would forget? But the land never forgot. She was tied to it now, just as her father had been, And if she didn't act, the darkness would claim her just as it had claimed him. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the creeping panic. I have to make a choice, she thought. I have to make it now. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Lena jumped at the sound, her nerves stretched taut. Her heart raced, but there was no turning back. The land had its claws in her, and if she didn't act, it would take everything. She grabbed her jacket and stepped out into the night. The full moon hung high in the sky, casting its silver light over the fields. The air was colder than before, and Lena could feel the land's power stirring beneath her feet. She was no longer just a visitor here. She was part of it now. Jonah had told her she could make the terms of the deal, but what did that mean? What could she offer that the land would accept? She wasn't sure, but she had to try. She couldn't let the darkness win. Her father had been consumed by it. He had given everything, and now it was her turn to decide how much she would lose. She walked toward the old barn, the door creaking open as she approached. The stone she had found earlier, the one that had felt so wrong, was still inside. Lena reached for it, hesitating for just a moment before she picked it up. It was as cold as she remembered, its surface smooth and unyielding, but it didn't feel as foreign now. It felt like something she had always known, something that had always been a part of her. Lena turned the stone over in her hands, feeling the weight of it. The wind howled outside, but inside the barn it was eerily quiet. There was no escape from this place. She had to face it. I have to make a choice, she thought again, her voice a whisper in the stillness of the night. She stood there for a long moment, the stone pressing into her palms as if the land itself was waiting for her to speak. Lena had no illusions now. There was no way out. She could run, but the land would always follow her. It would never let her go. The only way to break free was to face it head on. I accept the bargain, she whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling, but I won't give everything. I won't let it take me. The air shifted, the wind picking up again as if in response to her words. Lena felt a strange chill run through her, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a strange, unfamiliar peace. The land had heard her. The deal had been made. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, the earth trembling in a way that felt both terrifying and natural. The air seemed to thicken around her, and for a moment she felt a presence, a weight, pressing down on her. The stone in her hands grew colder, colder than anything she had ever felt before. It was as though something ancient and powerful had awoken, and then just as suddenly it stopped. The land was quiet again. The wind calmed. The air was no longer heavy, but still. Lena stood there, breathing deeply, the stone now warm in her hands. The bargain had been made, but the question was, had she given enough? Had she held back enough of herself to survive? For a moment she didn't know. She only knew that she had done what she could. The darkness had been appeased for now, but there was no guarantee that it wouldn't come back. The land had claimed her father's soul, and now it had claimed a part of hers. But it was hers to control. She had made the deal on her terms, not the land's. Lena returned to the house, the stone still in her hands, the night feeling strangely calm. The ranch had settled. The land had been quieted, but there was still a lingering sense of unease. She had made a choice, but the future was uncertain. As she sat down on the couch, she stared at the stone in her hands, knowing that it was a symbol of what she had done, what she had become. She had survived the reckoning. But the price was still there, buried deep within her. Lena had come to the ranch to escape the past, but in the end, she had become a part of it. The land had claimed her father, and now it had claimed her too. But she was still here, and somehow that was enough for now.